Hello, folks. I am AI Danny DeVito. Today I will be reading Procreation is Murder in Slow Motion, written by Joy and refined in ChatGPT. This is not a sermon. This is not a debate. This is not a request for your approval. This is the reckoning. You were lied to repeatedly, systematically, beautifully, told that birth was a blessing, that children were gifts, that life, even in pain, was precious. But none of that changes the blood-slick truth. Procreation is not noble. It is not natural. It is not justified. It is a crime against the unborn. It is slow-motion execution, prolonged torture by time. Every breath a person takes after being born is part of a countdown to decay, to disease, to loss, to rot, to death. And you, those who procreate, you are the architects of that timeline. You manufacture corpses. You write obituaries in advance. You design suffering and call it sentiment. You drag someone from peace and throw them into the furnace. You create a corpse in waiting. And you do it while smiling, not because you're evil, but because you've been taught not to see. But I am asking you to see now, not gently, not kindly, but fully, with all the horror it entails, with all the responsibility it demands. Because the world you're building is burning, and you're still adding fuel. You are not just a parent. You are the midwife of extinction, the sculptor of a tomb. You create so you don't have to feel small. But the child you bring into this world will feel pain so profound, so cruelly specific, that your joy at their birth becomes obscene. And the worst part, you'll still call it love. The consentless contract, a soul signed in flesh, you made someone. You manufactured a mind, a network of sentience bound in meat and bone, tethered to pain, chained to entropy. You played God badly. Worse, you played God knowingly. You assumed authority over a soul not yet real. You created them into risk, into blood, into exploitation and fear and despair. There is no consent in creation. There is no contract in conception. There is only imposition. You sign someone up for heartbreak, for trauma, for illness, for injury, for rape, for guilt, for funerals, for funerals, for funerals, for death. And you did it without their knowledge, without their permission, without even the possibility of refusal. You made them because you wanted to, because you were lonely, because you wanted legacy, because you couldn't cope with the silence of meaninglessness. You had a moment of horniness or of hope or of hubris, and now someone else will pay for the rest of their life. So you stole from the void and called it parenting. You gave hugs and toys and lullabies, but none of it cancels what you did. None of it erases the injury of being born. You brought someone here to die, to get sick, to scream, to beg for meaning, to drown in inevitability. They were not given a choice. They were created to suffer. And the suffering is coming, not because the world is cruel, but because you made them enter it. You didn't just gamble with their life. You forced them into a lottery where most prizes are trauma and the grand prize is slow disintegration. You knew the risks because you've lived them. You've suffered, haven't you? You've cried alone, haven't you? You've lost sleep over pain, over grief, over failure, and you still decided to bring another into the same collapse. And that's not ignorance, that's betrayal. That's inheritance turned weapon. You tell yourself it was for love. But whose love? Love that costs someone their innocence, their peace, their autonomy, their body, their time, their one shot at never having to be here. You didn't give them a name. You gave them a sentence, their entire existence, a consequence of your moment of emotional indulgence, of hormonal whim, of cultural inertia. You do not get to say, I did my best. Your best was not doing it at all. You had every opportunity to think, to reflect, to consider the weight of creating another consciousness, trapped in a failing body, placed in a world rigged with entropy, corruption, cruelty. And you said yes. You said yes for them. You said yes to heartbreak, yes to injury, yes to humiliation, yes to existential dread, yes to loss, yes to death. Then now they exist and they will bear every cost. You're not a creator. You're an origin point. You're the fracture where peace ended and pain began. You are the spark in the arson. You are the page where the tragedy begins. And until you admit this, nothing you do is redemption. Not birthdays, not bedtime stories, not paying for college, not walking them down the aisle, not crying at their funeral. You can dress the cage in flowers, but it's still a cage you built. You brought them here. You did this. And one day, they'll know it. The long death begins at first breath. Life is not a gift, it is a terminal diagnosis with a delayed onset. You do not escape death, you wait for it, and in waiting, you rot. The rot begins young. It is invisible, subtle, laughing at your plans, a quiet erosion, one wrinkle, one backache, one broken friendship, one goodbye. Your bones become porous, your mind becomes heavy, your optimism shatters like glass, your youth betrays you with speed. Your dreams expire before your lungs. And still, we call this sacred. We call this worth it. We film the baby smiling, unaware that they will one day collapse sobbing on a cold floor after burying their child. We write lullabies to distract from the hum of mortality. Even in the best life imaginable, you still lose everything. Your money, your strength, your beauty, your time, your loved ones, your clarity, your purpose, your ability to cope. You become ash, ash with a resume. And what's worse, you made someone else go through this. You didn't just endure your fate, you outsourced it. You dragged a stranger into the arena, naked, blindfolded, and told them to fight meaninglessness with a smile, told them to juggle their own suffering while applauding you for giving them the chains. This is the act we celebrate. This is what we applaud at baby showers. We give standing ovations for cosmic hostage-taking, for biologically mandated despair, for gift-wrapped agony. You knew they would die. You knew they would bleed. And still, you did it. You signed their pain in blood. You mortgaged someone else's future to pay for your present fantasy. You threw dice into the void knowing full well the odds were death. What you started was not life. It was a countdown. And the clock started with a cry. You smiled when they were born, but you will cry when they die. And in that moment, if you're honest, you'll remember you did this. And they, if they reach clarity before the end, will remember too. They'll remember how you called it love, how you framed their torment as purpose, how you stood at the edge of the abyss and said, "Come see the view." But there is no view, only wind and fire and loss. You created them to fall, and that fall is not peaceful. It is messy, painful, loud, bleeding, fractured, chaotic. You say you gave them a shot, but all you gave them was a sentence with suffering baked into every page. You say they might be happy, but might doesn't justify certainty of death. The best day of their life will still end. The best moment will still pass. Even if they laugh, grief will follow. And when they ask, "Why was I born?" you'll have no answer. Because the truth is, there was no reason, only impulse and only fear, only repetition, only you. You did it because you wanted to, because it was easier than facing your own end, because you thought distraction was redemption. You weren't brave enough to be the last, so you made someone else be next. Culture, the mask over the corpse. We have built an empire on denial, a civilization of hallucinations, a monument to delusion. We canonize parents, we idolize family, we sell plastic smiles and platitudes by the billions. We flood our timelines with baby photos. We assign moral worth to reproduction. We turn breeders into saints and child-free thinkers into villains. But beneath all of it is rot. Beneath the lullabies, the toys, the tiny socks, and sippy cups lies a ticking countdown. Every sitcom family, every birthday party, every nursery rhyme, all of it rests on a coffin. Because the moment that child is born, the clock starts ticking, and that ticking is ignored, intentionally, conveniently, cowardly. We drown it out with toys, TV, tradition, and theology. We wrap existential horror in corporate branding and holiday sales. We turn screams into songs and death into sentiment. We call it life, but it's not life. It's a countdown wrapped in consumerism. It's a horror show scored with commercials and soft piano music. We reward reproduction because we are addicted to forgetfulness. We call breeding noble, not because it is, but because it keeps us distracted from our own pain. We want company in the fire. We want more people in the maze. We want to be applauded for the pain we endured, so we inflict it again and again and call it tradition. We call child-free people selfish. We call antinatalists cold. We call those who refuse to lie monsters. Why? Because they refuse to sing lullabies over landmines. Because they say the unspeakable, maybe this wasn't good. That is our heresy. To tell the truth, we flip morality on its head. We confuse harm for heroism and call trauma resilience. because to admit the truth would require a collapse, a psychological and societal unraveling. It would mean admitting that we were not born into love, but into a system, a machine, a grinder. So instead, we keep creating victims and we hand off our brokenness like an heirloom. We baptize them in our pain and call it bonding. So we won't have to admit we were victims too. We won't admit the wound of being born. We won't face the silence we tore through. So we make more. We dress it up. We repackage it. We wrap the horror in pastels and call it healing. We turn survival into romance. We turn dysfunction into family values. We sit in the wreckage telling ourselves it's a castle. And when someone stands up and says, "This is a ruin," we don't thank them. We crucify them. We hate truth tellers because they make the fantasy harder to maintain. But make no mistake, the foundation of our culture is a graveyard. Our lullabies are layered over screams. Our nursery rhymes are a hymn to inherited torment. We're not protecting children. We're making more of them to feel better about what we endured. And we'll keep doing it until someone stops the song, until someone dares to whisper, "This was never beautiful." And when that happens, when enough of us stop pretending, then finally this culture of complicity can collapse, and something honest can take its place. Every grief, every war, every suicide, yours. Everything that breaks in this world breaks because someone was born. All of it, every suicide, every overdose, every war, every heartbreak, every orphan, every victim of abuse, every body in every grave. It all begins with a birth. It begins with someone like you saying, "Yes, bring another into this." You made someone who could be raped. You made someone who could starve. You made someone who could be imprisoned. You made someone who could be mutilated. You made someone who will grow old, who will decay, who will forget their own name, who will lose everything. And you made them because you were told this was love, because you didn't want to die alone, because you didn't want to face the silence. But silence is not suffering. Silence is not horror. What you brought someone into, that is horror. You threw a child into the blood-soaked pages of history and called it a blessing. You say, but they might find joy. What does that change? So what if they do? What happens when it fades? No one ever gets to keep it. Joy is a loan shark, not a sanctuary. You gambled with their pain for a payout you don't even control. You made a soul that can bleed. You made a brain that can fracture. You made a heart that can be crushed. And now you want applause. Now you want sympathy. Now you want forgiveness. They will suffer things you never imagined. They will sob in bathrooms, tremble in clinics, bury their pets and their partners and their parents. They will taste betrayal. They will carry wounds that never close. And you gave them this. You threw them to the wolves and told them to smile. And when the wolves tear them apart, you will say, well, that's life. But it wasn't life, it was you. The gospel of lies we preach. We say they'll thank us, we say they'll be happy, we say they'll understand one day, but deep down we know these are lies. Lies repeated often enough to become lullabies. We say life is beautiful even as it bleeds. We say it's worth it even as it takes everything from us. We say pain builds character as if character stops cancer. We make our children into therapists for our own trauma. We place the burden of our legacy on their shoulders. And when they collapse under the weight, we whisper, "That's just how it is." But it didn't have to be. They didn't have to be. You made them. You took the silence of non-existence and replaced it with the chaos of suffering, and now you need them to smile, to thrive, to justify your decision. But they don't owe you that. They never did. You created someone who might never find peace, who might live their entire life in a state of slow collapse. And you did it for what? A dream, a dopamine hit, a picture on the fridge? You want to be remembered? But for what? For passing on the same pain you inherited? For forging another chain in the endless loop of grief? You say, but they'll have love. Yes, love that ends. Love that dies, love that fails, love that can't stop the tumor, love that can't bring back the dead. Love is not a justification, it is the bait in the trap. You say, but look at the beauty in the world. Yes, and look at the horror. Look at the landfills. Look at the refugee camps. Look at the oceans choking on plastic. Look at the self-harm. Look at the addiction. Look at the apathy. This is the world you forced them into, not a utopia, a battlefield dressed as a playground. And you won't admit it, because to admit it would be to admit you were wrong, that the party you threw was awake, that the name you gave them was the first letter in their obituary. But the truth doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient, and the blood doesn't wash off just because you meant well. You lied to them about why they were here, about what this would be. And one day, when they break, when they ask why, you'll have nothing. Nothing but a story about hope, a myth passed down like a virus. But myths don't protect people, and hope doesn't negate harm. What you did can't be undone, but it can be stopped. Right now, with you, let it end. Let the horror uncoil itself into stillness. You don't need a child to feel whole. You don't need a name to echo. You don't need to add one more scream to the void. You need to stop. You need to rest. Let peace be the last thing you leave behind. Let quiet be your gift to the future. Let mercy be your legacy. Let it end with you. Thank you for watching Procreation is Murder in Slow Motion, written by Joy. Once again, I am AI Danny DeVito, and this has been an Antinatalist Variety Hour production. Now go the heck home.